Sir, you're going to need to gather your things. This row belongs to our elite circle guests. The words came out rehearsed, as a hallway floor that had been polished so many times nobody remembered what the original wood looked like underneath. Colleen Ashford stood in the aisle of Skyline Vantage, Flight 227. One hand resting on the headrest of Seat 2A, her silver airline pin catching the cabin light the way it had caught that same light for 19 years. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The tone itself was the instruction. The man in Seat 2A did not stand. He looked up slowly, with the unhurried calm of someone who had been expecting this. Not this flight, exactly, but this shape, this particular weight that certain kinds of authority carry into a room before a single fact has been checked. His name was Andre Calloway, 45 years old. Charcoal button-down, dark trousers, shoes polished enough to catch light but never enough to catch attention. On his left wrist sat a heavy steel watch, scratched at the case, the kind of watch a man keeps, not because it's valuable, but because of who gave it to him. "Is there a problem with my ticket?" he asked. Colleen didn't look at the ticket. She hadn't looked at it once since she'd spotted him sitting there. "There's a problem with the seat," she said. Behind her, filling the aisle with the particular entitlement of men who have never once been asked to wait, stood Bradford Iverson, 63, broad through the shoulders, silver-haired, a navy blazer that announced money the way certain voices announce rank, without effort, without apology. His hand rested on the back of Seat 2A like it was a fence post on land he owned. Beside him stood his wife, Marjorie Iverson, cream scarf, pearl studs, a monogrammed handbag gripped with both hands, her eyes passing over Andre the way eyes pass over furniture left in the wrong place. Andre looked at Colleen. He looked at Bradford's hand. Then he reached into his jacket and set his boarding pass on the armrest. Seat 2A, Skyline Vantage Flight 227, Chicago O'Hare to Seattle. First class, confirmed, paid in full 5 weeks ago under a corporate account. He tapped it once. "My boarding pass says 2A. Colleen gave it a glance. Not a reading, a glance. The kind you give a document when you've already decided it's wrong, and you're only waiting for the formality of proving it. "I see that," she said. "But Mr. and Mrs. Iverson have a long-standing arrangement with Skyline Vantage. They fly this route every month. 2A has always been part of that arrangement." "Their arrangement," Andre repeated, not a question. Just 2 words laid on the table for everyone in earshot to look at clearly. "That's correct. And where, exactly, is that arrangement documented?" A pause. "It's an informal accommodation, so it isn't in the system." Another pause, shorter, heavier. "Mr. and Mrs. Iverson are Founders Circle members, sir. Our most valued." That doesn't answer the question. Still quiet. Still unhurried. "Is it documented anywhere?" Colleen's jaw tightened. The professional warmth in her voice dropped half a degree. "Sir, I need you to appreciate that our long-term customers. I appreciate that my boarding pass says 2A. If you've ever been told to leave a place you had already earned the right to sit in, stay with this one. Because in 19 minutes, this man is going to do something that grounds an entire airline's fleet in 3 states. And nobody in that cabin saw it coming." 2 rows back, in Seat 4B, a travel content creator named Marcus Devane had stopped narrating his usual overhead bin video 11 seconds into the exchange. 26 years old, a following built on airport walkthroughs and honest hotel reviews, he'd boarded with his camera, rolling out of pure habit. Now the lens was pointed forward, steady, catching something he hadn't planned to catch and couldn't make himself stop catching. In Seat 3B, a retired schoolteacher named Eleanor Voss set her paperback face down in her lap. 71 years old, silver hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, flying to Seattle to see her granddaughter graduate. She had the stillness of someone who had spent 39 years in a classroom, learning exactly how these moments unfold, and exactly how long people wait before they say anything about it. She watched. She said nothing. Not yet. And that silence would sit in her chest for the rest of the flight like a stone she couldn't put down. Bradford Iverson shifted his weight. Whatever patience he'd boarded with had thinned to nothing. "This is ridiculous," he said, in a voice built by 20 years of boardrooms and country club terraces, a voice trained to be the last word in any room. "We sit here every single month. This should not be complicated." Andre turned to look at him, not sharply, the way you turn to look at something you want to see clearly. "It wasn't complicated," she said, "until you decided it should be." Bradford's face tightened. Marjorie set a hand on his arm, not to calm him, to signal. The signal was clear. Let the staff handle it. That's what staff is for. Colleen read the signal. She straightened, smoothed the front of her blazer, and turned back to Andre with a new hardness. "Sir, I'm going to need you to cooperate so we can get this cabin settled for departure." "I am cooperating," Andre said. "I'm sitting in my assigned seat." And then he said the sentence that changed the air in the cabin. "I don't think this is about the seat." Colleen blinked. Bradford stiffened. Marjorie's composed expression held, but something behind her eyes shifted, a flicker that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite surprise, but close to recognition. The recognition of someone who understands that a sentence like that, said that calmly, by that particular man, at that particular moment, cannot be unsaid. Marcus Devane's phone kept recording. Eleanor Voss looked down at her hands. What Colleen Ashford did not know, what Bradford Iverson could not have imagined, what every silent passenger in that cabin was about to discover, was that the man in seat 2A was Andre Calloway, founder and CEO of Halcyon Insight Group, the company that builds the very software banks hospitals and airlines use to find the bias hiding quietly inside their own systems. And in 19 minutes, he would not just refuse to move. He would ground Skyline Vantage's entire fleet before the day was over. Stay with me, because the next part starts 39 minutes earlier, in the back of a regular yellow cab that smelled like pine air freshener. And it explains exactly why Andre Calloway was never going to stand up from that seat. 39 minutes before Colleen Ashford said a word to him. Andre had climbed out of a cab at O'Hare's curb. Not a car service, not a driver who knew his name. A regular taxi hailed off the street outside his hotel. Cracked phone mount taped to the dash, a pine tree air freshener spinning gently from the mirror. He had been doing this for 11 years. Flying undercover in a plain shirt, on an ordinary ticket, because he'd noticed carefully and methodically, the way he noticed everything, that people treated him differently depending on how he arrived. This wasn't a costume. It was the absence of one. Clothes that said nothing about who he was, which was exactly the point. The watch on his wrist, steel, scratched at the crown, the strap replaced twice over the years, but the face original had been given to him by his mother, Miriam Callaway, on the morning his acceptance letter to Morehouse arrived. She had worked a double shift that same day at St. Agnes Medical, where she'd spent 26 years as a labor and delivery nurse, standing on floors that never once paused for her feet or her name. She had pressed the watch into both of his palms. "This doesn't tell people who you are," she'd said. "It reminds you." He had carried that sentence into every room that didn't want him in it since. He carried it now, rolling his bag through Terminal 3, past coffee kiosks and travelers moving with the tired efficiency of people who flew too often to find any of it interesting. His phone buzzed. A text from Renata, his chief of staff, who ran the operational side of Halcyon, with a mix of warmth and precision that made people feel cared for and unable to argue with her at the same time. Skyline Vantage Board confirmed for Thursday. Legal wants your final deck by Wednesday noon. Board chair says this one's close. Andre typed back, "Understood." Flying out now. Halcyon Insight Group had been in talks with Skyline Vantage for 11 months. The airline had come to them, the way most large institutions did. Reluctantly, after the cost of not calling became worse than the cost of admitting there was a problem. A federal transportation inquiry had quietly opened into Skyline Vantage's passenger service patterns. The numbers weren't dramatic. No slurs, no headlines, no single ugly moment anyone could point to. Just numbers. The kind that, stacked up over 3 years and hundreds of thousands of flights, showed passengers of color in premium cabins flagged for verification checks at rates the data simply could not explain away. Numbers showing informal seating arrangements never logged, never official, quietly displacing confirmed, paying passengers. Andre had built his entire company on finding exactly that kind of pattern. Halcyon had already partnered with 4 airlines, 2 national banks, and a hospital network. In every single case, the pattern had existed long before he arrived. In every case, someone inside had known and looked away. He flew undercover 4 times a year, not to manufacture evidence, because he never needed to manufacture anything. He flew because before he stood in front of a boardroom and told executives their systems were producing harm, he wanted to understand, firsthand, what that harm actually felt like from inside it. At the gate, his ticket scanned clean. "Thank you, Mr. Callaway. Seat 2A. Enjoy your flight." Behind him in the priority lane, 2 more passengers stepped through. He didn't turn around. He heard a boarding pass scanned with the particular self-satisfaction of someone who expected the machine to thank them more enthusiastically, and a voice, low and carrying, say to a companion, finally. On the jet bridge, he caught 4 words, "That's our row." He kept walking. The first-class cabin of Flight 227 was clean, pale, and expensive, in the way that spaces designed to make certain people feel at home often look, to everyone else, slightly foreign. Beautiful in a way that quietly announces it isn't built for you. Andre stowed his bag, sat down in 2A, buckled in, and opened his tablet to the Halcyon executive summary. For 90 seconds, the world was quiet. Junior flight attendant came through the aisle, dark-haired, maybe 29, with the focused warmth of someone who hadn't yet had enough years in the job to let that warmth wear down into performance. Her name tag read J. Ruiz. "Can I get you anything before we push back? Water would be great. Thank you. You've got it." A real smile. She headed for the galley. 90 seconds. That was all he got. Then the shadow fell across his row. Bradford. Iverson stopped in the aisle and looked at Andre the way a man looks at something that has appeared somewhere it does not belong in his mental map of the world. He looked at the seat, then at Andre, then at the seat again. The order was not an accident. "Excuse me, I believe you're in our seats." Andre looked up unhurried. He had learned over decades to be unhurried in these moments because hurry was what people expected. Hurry, or apology, or the quiet shuffle of someone removing themselves before the conversation could ever require anyone to be accountable for what they'd actually said. "My boarding pass says 2A. We always fly 2A and 2B, Bradford said. "It's our arrangement with the airline, 22 years. Arrangements aren't assignments." The sentence sat between them like something dropped and left on the floor. Marjorie Iverson stepped up beside her husband, her expression already deciding how this would be handled. With the right word, to the right person. She looked past Andre rather than at him. Bradford lifted one finger toward the front of the cabin, and Colleen Ashford appeared within seconds, as if the gesture itself had summoned her. "Mr. Iverson, what can I do for you?" In row 4, Marcus Devane raised his phone a few more degrees. In row 3, Eleanor Voss set her book down, and Andre Calloway, who had spent 20 years learning the exact shape of what was coming, picked up his boarding pass again and waited for a conversation that had already ended in everyone's mind except his own to realize it hadn't even started. Colleen took the pass with 2 fingers and studied it for longer than a boarding pass requires. She tapped her tablet, tapped again. The frown wasn't confusion. It was the look of someone searching for a problem the document refused to hand her. "It does show 2A, she finally said, in the tone of someone announcing an unfortunate complication rather than a plain fact. However, the word arrived like a door nudged open to let in something that had no invitation. Mr. and Mrs. Iverson are Founders Circle members. They have a long-standing accommodation on this route, and I'm sure you can understand. We try to honor those relationships. I understand you're asking me to give up a seat I paid for, so someone else can have a seat they'd prefer. We're simply trying to find a resolution that works for everyone." "What resolution works for me?" Andre asked, not sharp, genuinely curious. Colleen blinked, a small blink, a fraction of a second, but the blink of someone who hadn't actually considered that question before walking up the aisle. "We have excellent seats in the forward cabin. I bought a first-class ticket, specifically 2A, 5 weeks ago, confirmed. Of course, and we value your business, but in situations like this..." "What situation? What is this situation, specifically?" The question hung in the cabin like something that had been waiting a long time to finally be asked out loud. Colleen opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "A legacy passenger conflict," she said, settling on language that made the thing sound administrative instead of what it actually was. "An informal arrangement that isn't in your own booking system," Andre said. "Informal arrangements don't override confirmed tickets. If I checked into a hotel with a confirmed reservation and someone with a preference for my room was sitting in the lobby, the hotel wouldn't hand them my room because they preferred it. Same principle." Bradford had been standing behind Colleen with dwindling patience. He stepped forward now, past her shoulder, his voice dropping into something rougher. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but we've been flying this airline for 22 years. They know us. That seat." Andre turned to look at him fully. "Mr. Iverson, I don't know what you spend with this airline, and you don't know a single thing about me." The sentence hit the cabin the way certain truths do, not loud, but heavy enough to redistribute into every corner of the space. Bradford's jaw worked. Marjorie's fingers tightened on her handbag strap. Marjorie stepped into the row and set her handbag on 2B, the seat beside Andre, the seat she'd occupy if given both. She placed it there the way people plant a flag, with the ease of someone claiming what she'd already decided was hers. Andre looked at the bag, then at her. "Ma'am, that seat isn't yours either." Something shifted under Marjorie's composure, the authentic surprise of a woman who hadn't been spoken to without an apology attached in longer than she could remember. "It's just a bag," she said, "then move it." 2 words, clean, final. Marjorie looked at Bradford. Bradford looked at Colleen. Colleen looked somewhere that was not Andre. The silence stretched until Bradford reached over and yanked the bag away himself. The motion stiff, with the indignation of a man performing a concession he'd already decided not to acknowledge. In row 4, Marcus Devane posted his first update. No video yet, just text. "First class, Skyline Vantage 227. Had, black man with a confirmed ticket being told to move, so a couple can keep what they call their arrangement." Watching this, he had 61,000 followers. By the time the plane pushed back, that post would be shared 4,000 times. He didn't know that yet. He kept the phone up and kept watching. The cabin supervisor, Russell Combs, 49, thick through the chest, 22 years in airline operations after a decade in the Marines, arrived from the forward galley with the contained authority of a man who believed order was always possible and always his to restore. Colleen had briefed him in 20 seconds. Passenger in 2A refusing to cooperate, legacy members displaced, losing the departure window. Russell had built his entire approach around the words refusing to cooperate without asking for a third piece of information. "Mr. Callaway," he said, stopping at the row, chin faintly elevated. "I understand we're having an issue. There's no issue with my ticket. I'm asking you to assist us in resolving a seating concern, so this flight can depart on time. You're asking me to give up the seat assigned to me on a ticket I purchased for another passenger's preference. That isn't resolving a concern, that's removing a passenger without cause. Andre's voice never rose. What authority does the crew have to do that, exactly? Russell held his expression. The crew has broad discretion, sir. I'd like that in writing. Your name, your employee number, and a written statement that the reason for removing me is another passenger's preference, not a safety or maintenance concern. The cabin went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of settling in before takeoff, but the quiet of people who had just heard a sentence rearrange the shape of everything they'd been watching. Russell had handled medical emergencies, drunk passengers, screaming toddlers, a man who once tried to open an emergency door at cruising altitude. In 22 years, no one had ever asked him to put a crew instruction in writing. He did not know in that moment whether Andre had the legal standing to demand it. What he did know, with a discomfort pressing at the back of his throat, was that he didn't have an answer. Bradford had been building toward something since Andre turned to look at him, and now he stepped fully into the row, close enough that his shadow fell across Andre's shoulder, one hand landing flat on the overhead bin directly above Andre's head. Not grabbing. Nothing that could be formally named, but deliberate. A physical claim in the absence of a legal one. This is getting ridiculous, Bradford said, low. The register men use when they want a private threat to sound like a reasonable observation. Get your things and move. I'm not asking anymore. Andre's eyes moved to the hand on the bin. Your hand is on the bin above my seat. I'd suggest you remove it before this becomes a different kind of conversation. Bradford's face reddened, and then, before Russell could step in, Bradford's hand dropped from the bin to Andre's shoulder. A shove, not hard. But a shove. The first hand actually laid on another human being since this had started, and every phone in the cabin that was still recording caught it clean. The cabin gasped, a small collective intake of breath. Sir, Russell's voice cracked with something that sounded, for the first time, like genuine alarm, not for Andre, but for the airline. Mr. Iverson, step back now. Bradford stepped back one pace, the minimum, chest heaving, face unreadable except for the twitch at his jaw. It was the first thing Russell had done in this entire encounter that could be called protective of Andre Calloway, and it had happened only because Bradford had briefly become a liability to the tidiness of the situation rather than an asset to it. Andre noted the distinction. He noted everything. He opened his notes app and began to type, calm as still water. 9:14 a.m. passenger B. Iverson made physical contact. Shoulder, one hand. Witnessed by cabin crew, multiple gestures, recorded on at least one device. Escalating to physical altercation. He hit send to Renata before he even looked back up. Colleen walked to the forward galley and pressed the intercom. Her voice came through the cabin speakers, calm, slightly altered from its usual script. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief boarding irregularity in the forward cabin. We appreciate your patience while our crew resolves a seating discrepancy. Every head that turned forward saw the same thing. A black man sitting quietly in 2A, a white couple standing over him with visible agitation. The phrase seating discrepancy rearranged itself in the mind of every listener into something far more specific than Colleen had intended. Marcus Devane posted the video, the one with Bradford's hand on the overhead bin, the shove, Sandra, Marjorie, planting her bag. All of it time-stamped, silent except for the low murmur of cabin noise underneath. Jasmine Ruiz, the junior flight attendant, stepped out of the galley, holding the passenger manifest on her tablet. She had been watching the whole thing from the doorway, with the specific, nauseating helplessness of someone who knows the right thing and hasn't yet done it, for reasons that make perfect sense internally, and none at all in the retelling. She was 29, She had a lease in Tacoma that needed this job to make its payments, a mother in Spokane who was proud of her, and in 2 years at Skyline Vantage, not one single write-up. She walked into the aisle anyway. "Colleen, I checked the manifest. His bookings confirmed, paid in full, no flags, nothing irregular. There is no discrepancy." Colleen turned on her with the expression of someone interrupted mid-sentence by a person who was never invited into the conversation. "Jasmine, return to the rear galley and finish beverage service, I understand. But his ticket." Now, Jasmine didn't go. She stepped back to the galley entrance and stood there, tablet lit, held against her chest, like something she was refusing to hand over. Russell moved forward, done searching for a solution that was administratively tidy. "Mr. Callaway, I want to be direct. If you continue to refuse crew cooperation, I'm classifying this as a security matter. This aircraft does not push back until it's resolved, and the resolution is your compliance. So now my valid ticket is a security threat. Your continued non-compliance." "What non-compliance, Mr. Combs? I'm seated in my assigned seat. I've shown a valid boarding pass. I've spoken at a consistent, respectful volume. I have not moved from where I am legally entitled to sit. What specific action am I failing to take?" Russell didn't answer immediately, because the honest answer, "You are failing to move," was not, under any fair reading, a compliance failure. It was a request with no legitimate authority behind it. And in the pause that followed, everyone paying attention understood exactly what the silence meant. Eleanor Voss stood up from seat 3B, book abandoned on the cushion. "He hasn't done anything wrong," she said, not loud, but without lowering it enough to keep it private. It was the first voice in the cabin, other than crew or the Eversens, and it landed with the weight that first voices always carry. Colleen turned. "Ma'am, please let us handle this." "I am watching you handle it," Eleanor said. Colleen's voice, when it came back to Andre, had dropped to a temperature that had given up warmth entirely. "Sir, last chance. Cooperate, or I'm calling airport security to board this aircraft and remove you." "Please do," Andre said. "And when they arrive, show them my boarding pass, and then explain to them why a confirmed first-class seat requires as law enforcement to resolve." Colleen's breath went shallow. The threat had always worked. It was the last lever in the drawer. It had never once been handed straight back to her like evidence. Bradford, humiliated by his own shove and desperate to reclaim ground, stepped forward one final time, right up to the head of the row. "I have friends on this airline's board," he said, "people who know me personally. This is not going to end well for you, son." Andre looked up at him without moving anything else. "Son," he repeated quietly. "Then, maybe this is exactly when you should call them." Bradford blinked. That wasn't the answer of a worried man. That was the answer of a man who'd been waiting. At the forward door, the gate agent, Priscilla Yang, touched her earpiece. "Ops, we're 3 minutes from losing the window. I need a status on 2A. Inside the cabin." Andre turned to look out the window at the gray Chicago sky, patient and indifferent above the tarmac. His right hand rested on his phone. His left hand rested on the armrest. The watch on his wrist marked the seconds the way it always had, steady, unhurried, and for one moment he was somewhere else entirely. He could have stood up right then. He could have said his name, said his company, said just enough to end this in 60 seconds. He knew exactly how. He had done it before. He didn't move. And to understand why, you have to go back 22 years, to a Sunday afternoon in October, when Andre Calloway was 23 years old, wearing the only good suit he owned, flying on a single ticket he'd saved 4 months to buy. If you've ever stayed somewhere, you had every right to be, even while everything around you said leave. This next part is exactly for you. He was 23. The suit from a department store in D.C., ironed on the floor of his apartment because he didn't own a board. The job waiting in Seattle was an entry-level analyst position at a consulting firm. The kind of job that doesn't sound like much until you understand what it becomes. Until you understand that the people who walk through that door in year one sometimes walk out a decade later, running their own companies. The night before the flight, an email had arrived. Complimentary upgrade, random seat allocation. He read it 3 times, not wanting to misunderstand. He'd never sat in first class in his life. He boarded early. Window seat, cream leather. He set his interview folder in the seat pocket and thought about what his mother would say if she could see him there. He decided she'd laugh and then straighten his tie. A flight attendant came through taking drink orders. She reached his row, looked at him, looked at her manifest, looked at him again. "Can I help you?" The exact right words, in exactly the wrong order, carrying exactly the wrong weight. "Water, please," he said. She didn't bring the water. She brought a colleague. The two of them studied the manifest together and spoke to each other in the low voice people use when discussing a problem rather than addressing a person. "Sir, there may have been a system error with your upgrade. We're going to need you to return to your assigned economy seat until we verify the booking." The email said, "Just until we confirm." He stood. He picked up his folder. He walked to the back of the plane and sat in a middle seat between 2 strangers and didn't look out a window for the rest of the flight. He was never called back to first class. He interviewed exhausted, in a suit that no longer helped. He knew every answer. He could feel that the interviewer knew he knew every answer. He could also feel the way you feel a temperature change before you can name it, that something in the room had already been decided before he sat down. He didn't get the job. He flew home in economy in the window seat this time because nobody sat beside him, and looked out into the dark and made a promise to himself. Not spoken aloud, not written anywhere, never shared. Just a sentence in his own head. Never again. The strongest promises are usually the ones made when no one is watching. He went home. He applied elsewhere. He got a job. He spent the next 14 years doing work that mattered and being passed over for things that should have been his, starting over more times than anyone should have to, until the day he sat in a meeting reviewing a loan approval algorithm and saw, laid out plainly in the data, something so clearly wrong that he understood. For the first time, the real question wasn't whether bias existed in these systems. It was whether anyone was going to build the tools to make it impossible to ignore. He wrote the business plan for Halcyon Insight Group on a napkin at a coffee shop that same week. He was 37. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. 7 years later, he sat in 2A of Skyline Vantage Flight 227, and Colleen Ashford stood over him wearing the exact same expression that flight attendant had worn 22 years earlier. Not questioning his right to be there exactly, just needing him not to be there. Andre looked down at the watch on his wrist. He thought about his mother on those hospital floors for 26 years. He thought about something she'd said once, at the kitchen table, tired in the particular way of a woman who'd spent her whole life doing excellent work in rooms that weren't built for her. "I do good work, not because they deserve it. I do it because the patients do." He understood that now in a new way. He wasn't sitting in this seat for himself. He'd already survived the version where he gave it up. He knew exactly what that cost. He was sitting here. Every person who boarded this airline after him deserved to sit in their assigned seat without being asked to prove they'd earned it. He put his hand back on the armrest. He would not move. Jasmine Ruiz had been standing at the galley entrance for 6 minutes, holding the manifest, holding the specific helplessness that isn't real helplessness but feels indistinguishable from it in the moment. Then she stopped holding it. She walked past Colleen and stood facing her in front of the whole cabin. "I need to say something." Her voice shook slightly, not from fear. "I have the manifest. Mr. Callaway's booking has been in this system for 5 weeks. No flags, no conflicts. What's happening right now is not a seating discrepancy. Jasmine, Colleen said, voice dropping into controlled authority. You are a second-year flight attendant. This is not your conversation, I understand, but his ticket. You will be written up for this. Jasmine looked at her for a long moment. She thought about the lease in Tacoma. She thought about her mother in Spokane. She thought about the 6 minutes she'd spent deciding whether to walk out of that galley. Then, write me up, she said. 3 words. The cabin went absolutely still. Eleanor Voss closed her eyes for 1 second, the specific release of someone who's been holding tension, not because the situation resolved, but because something true had finally been spoken aloud. And there's relief in that even when the truth costs something. Marcus Devane had been recording continuously since Jasmine stepped out. He would post that clip with no caption at all. 3 seconds of silence after then write me up. It would become the most shared moment of the entire day. The cabin phone rang. Russell answered, listened, hung up. We're about to miss the window. Colleen looked at Andre. Andre was typing on his phone. Not ignoring the scene, documenting it, because he'd learned long ago that the best thing you can do in a moment of escalating injustice is make sure the record is airtight before the moment passes. Mr. Combs, Andre said, looking up, you need to make a decision. I'd suggest you make the right one. Not for my sake, because the window for making it easily is about to close. The cockpit door opened. Captain Rene Okafor stepped out. 54 years old, close-cropped hair, silvering at the temples, 29 years flying commercial aircraft, the precise, unhurried movements of a woman who made high-stakes decisions for a living and had long since learned that the quality of a decision mattered more than its speed. She took in the cabin in one sweep. Russell's posture, Colleen's face, Jasmine standing steady with a tablet, Bradford rigid in 2C, where he'd retreated after the shove, Marjorie in 2D staring at her hands, Andre perfectly still in 2A, phone in hand. Mr. Combs, Miss Ashford, forward galley now. She paused, looked at Jasmine. You stay. Then she walked to row 2. Mr. Callaway, I'm Captain Okafor. I'm going to hear exactly what happened here. I've been asking for exactly that since this started, Andre said. Something in her face acknowledged the weight of it. Not an apology yet, but recognition. The specific recognition of someone who understands the shape of a failure before she's heard the details. In the galley, Colleen and Russell briefed her in the compressed, careful language of people trying to control a narrative before it controls them. Irregular passenger, informal legacy accommodation, non-compliance, possible security classification. Captain Okafor listened without interrupting, the way people who make critical decisions actually listen, not waiting for a gap to talk, but hearing the gap between what was said and what wasn't. When they finished, she asked one question. What did he actually do? The silence that followed was heavier than the question itself. He refused to vacate the seat, Colleen said, the seat on his boarding pass. And Mr. Everson's arrangement, where is it documented? Russell looked at Colleen. Colleen didn't look at Russell. It's informal. Captain Okafor raised one hand. She didn't need the end of that sentence. She walked back to 2A. Mr. Callaway, what happened on this aircraft before I stepped out of that cockpit is not acceptable. I want to say that first. I appreciate that, Andre said. And I need you to understand, what happened before you stepped out is not new. Not for me. Not for a great many people who fly first class looking the way I look. The captain absorbed that without arguing, without the generic institutional apology that closes a chapter instead of reading it. What do you need? I need the manifest preserved. I need crew communications preserved. I need a written record of everything that was requested of me, and by whom. And I need your senior vice president of customer experience on the line. Now. She walked to the cabin phone. Andre reached into his bag and set a matte, black card holder on the tray table. Closed, unopened, just placed there, with the quiet finality of someone laying down the last document on a table and waiting for the room to understand what it's looking at. Colleen stared at it. She didn't know what was inside. She didn't need to yet. Something in the room had shifted, and it wasn't shifting back. The connection came through the galley speaker, patched into the cabin. Gregory Halstead, Senior Vice President of Customer Experience for Skyline Vantage. His corporate smoothness, thin over something unshielded underneath. The voice of a man who had just done the math in under 3 minutes, and understood there was exactly one way through this that didn't make everything worse. Mr. Callaway. On behalf of Skyline Vantage, I want to offer my sincere apology for what's occurred. What exactly are you apologizing for? A breath, audible before he answered. I apologize for the confusion surrounding your seating. There was no confusion. The seat was mine. The ticket was valid. There was no ambiguity in the system. The confusion is why that wasn't enough. Silence. We apologize for the way the situation was handled. Handled by whom? A longer pause. We acknowledge that Skyline Vantage personnel attempted to remove you from your confirmed seat to accommodate another passenger's preference, and that this attempt continued after your documentation had already confirmed your right to remain in 2A. A quiet murmur moved through the cabin. Not applause. Something more serious. The sound of people recognizing the weight of an admission just made on record. And why did that happen, Mr. Halstead? The silence that followed was the heaviest of the whole encounter. Not the silence of a man who didn't know the answer, but of a man who knew it and understood that saying it out loud, on speaker, in front of these witnesses, would be the kind of honesty he couldn't walk back. Andre didn't wait for him to fill it. He looked at Colleen. He looked at Russell. He looked at Bradford, still rigid in 2C. Because someone decided, Andre said, that my boarding pass was less convincing than Mr. Iverson's expectation. Because a certain kind of passenger tends to be believed before his ticket is even checked. And a different kind of passenger has to produce it twice. Then wait for a supervisor, then face a security threat, then get physically shoved by a man twice his age, and still do all of it without raising his voice. That's not confusion, Mr. Halstead. That's a pattern. And I believe you already know that because your airline came to my company 9 months ago asking for help fixing exactly this. He opened the card holder and set a black business card face up on the tray table without handing it to anyone. Marcus Devane zoomed in from row 4, read it, lowered his phone, raised it again, and posted a single line with the card visible in frame. The man they spent 19 minutes trying to remove from his seat runs the company Skyline Vantage hired to fix exactly what just happened to him. His phone began vibrating continuously with notifications the second he hit post. In the cabin, someone whispered, he builds the bias detection software. It moved row to row like current along a wire. Someone else said, and they tried to shove him out of his own seat. Colleen had not looked away from the card in 30 seconds. When she finally looked up at Andre, her expression wasn't quite guilt. It was the look of someone realizing the exact distance between what she'd thought she was doing and what she'd actually done. Mr. Halstead, Andre said, Halcyon's board review with your executive committee was scheduled for Thursday. That review is on hold, pending an independent investigation of this flight and of Mr. Iverson's conduct, which at this point includes physical contact with a paying passenger. Witnessed by your own crew and recorded by multiple travelers. The sound through the speaker wasn't quite a word. It was breath. The breath of a man catching himself before the wrong thing came out. Mr. Callaway, that partnership is strategically important to us. Integrity is strategically important to me. You have 3 minutes. Nobody spoke while they waited. Colleen stood at the galley entrance with her hands clasped. A woman who'd built 19 years of identity out of competence and had just watched it crack straight down the middle. Russell sat in the jump seat, doing the quieter, more honest reckoning, Some people do when they realize they moved faster than they should have and chose order over right. Bradford stared straight ahead in 2C, his earlier bravado gone, replaced by the stillness of a man who'd finally understood that stillness might not be enough to save him. Marjorie stared out the window at the tarmac, handbag in her lap, saying nothing. Gregory Halstead came back at 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Mr. Callaway. Skyline Vantage has agreed to an independent, external review of the events aboard Flight 227. Written confirmation is being sent to your legal counsel now. All crew logs, cabin recordings, and service records related to this flight will be preserved immediately. A pause. Additionally, Mr. Had. Iverson's conduct, including the physical contact with you, will be referred to airport authorities for review upon landing, and his founder's circle membership is suspended effective immediately, pending that review. In 2C, Bradford's head snapped toward the galley. Now hold on. Captain Okafor turned to him, voice flat and final. Mr. Iverson, you will remain seated and silent for the remainder of this flight, or I will have you removed at the gate, and you will answer to police officers instead of an airline. Your choice. Bradford said nothing else for the rest of the trip. And the independent reviewer, Andre asked, are they inside Skyline Vantage's chain of command? No, external. Then I accept. Thank you, Mr. Halstead. 2 words, clean and final. They landed with more force than the entire 19 minutes of argument that came before them. Captain Okafor walked to Colleen. Miss Ashford, you're relieved from first-class service, effective now, pending the outcome of the review. 19 years sat behind Colleen's eyes. Captain. With respect, you attempted to remove a confirmed passenger without checking the manifest, based solely on another passenger's preference. Miss Ruiz checked the manifest. You didn't. That's the record. Colleen looked at Jasmine. Jasmine didn't look away. I've served this airline for 19 years, Colleen said, and her voice was almost too small for the cabin to hold. Then you knew better, the captain said. Colleen walked to the rear of the plane. Each step was precise and contained, carrying nothing that could be called defeat except the thing underneath it, which was exactly that. Renata's message buzzed on Andre's phone. Confirmation received from Skyline Vantage Legal. External review confirmed. Board chair notified, pulling Colleen Ashford's service history now. He read it, typed back, send it to the captain. The captain's own phone buzzed a moment later. She read it, jaw tightening by a degree only someone watching closely would catch. 6 prior passenger complaints over 3 years. 4 involving passengers of color in premium cabins. All closed without formal investigation. I didn't know, she said quietly. I know you didn't, Andre said. That's part of the problem. She turned to Russell. Mr. Combs, you'll provide a full written statement before this aircraft departs. Your status going forward will be decided by operations. Russell looked at her, then at Andre, not with resentment, but with the particular expression of a man beginning to understand something about himself he'd rather not, and can no longer avoid. I heard the words refusing to cooperate, he said. I didn't ask what the actual situation was. No, Andre said. You didn't. Russell nodded once, went to the galley and started writing. Andre turned to Jasmine. You checked the manifest from the very beginning. I should have said something sooner. You said it when it cost you something. That matters more than most people ever realize. Eleanor Voss stood from 3B. Mr. Callaway. I recognized what was happening the moment Miss Ashford approached you, and I waited too long to say anything. You said it, Andre told her. Not soon enough. She held his gaze. I taught for 39 years. I know exactly how these moments work. I know silence is a choice. Today I made it too slowly. She sat back down, not looking for forgiveness, simply naming what she'd done and leaving it on the record, which was the most honest thing she had to offer. From row 4, Marcus Devane spoke without lowering his phone. I've had this going since it started. 1.1 million views on the first clip alone. Do you want any of it taken down? Keep it up, Andre said. Let people see what it looks like before the system works, and what it looks like when it finally does. The cabin speaker crackled one last time. Captain Okafor, Mr. Callaway. One more thing for the record, Gregory Halstead said, his voice finally shedding the last of its corporate polish. The informal arrangement for Mr. and Mrs. Iverson is terminated, effective immediately. It should never have been permitted to override confirmed passenger assignments. We take full responsibility. Bradford didn't move. Marjorie looked at her hands. Thank you, Mr. Halstead, Andre said. One more thing from me. Jasmine Ruiz's actions today are exactly the kind of judgment this industry needs more of. I want that on the record from me, directly, regardless of what your internal review concludes. Noted, Mr. Callaway. With gratitude. The line went quiet. In the cabin, passengers began to exhale. Not the loud release of a crowd watching something satisfying, but something quieter, the release of strangers who'd witnessed something real and understood, privately, that they'd been changed by it. A flight attendant named Priya Ose boarded to replace Colleen, moved through the cabin with settled, unhurried competence, and stopped at 2A. Mr. Callaway, I'm Priya. Can I get you some water? Yes, Andre said, thank you. No suspicion, no pause, no hovering question about whether the request belonged to the person making it. Just a glass of water, offered to a passenger in his seat. The thing that should have happened from the very start. The aircraft pushed back at 9:41, 27 minutes late, and changed for good. Andre watched Chicago slide past the window, the gray sweep of the tarmac, the terminal's distant geometry, the city's total indifference to the small human dramas playing out inside it. He thought about his mother. He thought about a 23-year-old in a department store suit who'd walked from first class to economy and made a promise, in silence, that had taken 22 years to keep in full. Jasmine brought him water again without being asked. She said nothing else, which was exactly right. 6 weeks later, Colleen Ashford received formal notice of termination. The independent review confirmed 4 of 6 historical complaints as credible, documented incidents of differential treatment. The language was careful, a pattern of preferential engagement with certain passengers and heightened scrutiny of others in premium cabins, consistent across multiple incidents over 3 years. No single incident was called intentional. The pattern was called undeniable. Bradford Iverson faced a formal citation for battery after airport police reviewed the footage on landing, resulting in a fine and a mandatory anger management program. Skyline Vantage permanently revoked his membership. His informal seating arrangement was struck from every system it had ever quietly existed in, and word of the incident reached the board of the manufacturing company he chaired. 2 major clients quietly ended their contracts within the month, citing reputational concerns. At his country club, conversations grew shorter whenever he entered a room. Marjorie moved out of their house 11 weeks later. Friends said the marriage hadn't survived watching each other's worst moment broadcast to 4 million strangers. In an interview he never should have agreed to, visibly diminished, Bradford said the only thing that mattered. I was wrong. Not about the seat. About what I thought I was allowed to take. Russell Combs kept his job, reduced in seniority, with mandatory retraining. His written statement, the one that named what he'd done without excusing it, became the most honest document in the entire case file. He spent a long time sitting with the distance between the man he'd believed himself to be and the man who wrote it. He chose to stay inside that discomfort instead of walking away from it. Jasmine Ruiz received an offer from Halcyon Insight Group 3 weeks later. Not a rescue, a real role, leading frontline accountability training for airline partners. She turned it down once. She accepted it the second time. She has never regretted the 3 words she said in that aisle. The partnership between Skyline Vantage and Halcyon Insight Group was signed 2 months after Flight 227. No ceremony, no press release. It included full integration of Halcyon's bias detection tools into every layer of passenger service. Not just booking algorithms, but upgrade, sequencing, flagging procedures, and every informal accommodation that had ever quietly existed outside the official system. It included mandatory quarterly public reporting on differential treatment. It included a passenger advisory panel with rotating seats. Marcus Devane was invited to sit on it. He accepted. Eleanor Voss wrote Andre a letter 4 months later, by hand, on paper, the way she'd always written things that mattered. She told him about a job interview in 1987 she'd almost lost the same way. She told him she'd spent 39 years teaching children about the difference between knowing the right thing and doing it, and how long it had taken her to fully live that lesson herself. She thanked him, then crossed the line out, because she decided the crossing out mattered more than what was underneath it, and sent the letter anyway. Andre read it twice and kept it in his desk drawer, beside the case that had once held his mother's watch. 2 months after Flight 227, Andre Calloway flew to Seattle again, Skyline Vantage, first class. He arrived at the curb in a yellow cab, wore the same plain shirt, checked in at the gate, seat 2A, confirmed, and walked down the jet bridge. A flight attendant he'd never seen before came through the cabin, looked at him, and said, without a flicker of hesitation, "Good morning. Can I get you anything before we push back?" "Water," he said. "Thank you." She brought it, moved on. Nothing else. He looked out at the gray morning sky, wide and indifferent, full of people who had no idea anything had ever happened on a Tuesday 6 weeks earlier. He thought about his mother on those hospital floors for 26 years, doing excellent work, not because the room deserved it, but because the work did. He thought about the 23-year-old who'd walked back to economy in a suit, ironed on an apartment floor, and the promise he'd made to no one but himself. He had kept it. Not for himself. He'd already survived the version where he gave the seat up and built something enormous out of that survival. He'd kept it for whoever would sit in 2A after him, for whoever sat there after that person, for every quiet passenger on every flight with a boarding pass that said exactly what it said and deserved to be believed the first time they showed it. He opened his notes app, and at the top of a new entry, in the space where he always logged these flights, he wrote one line: "No incident." He closed the app and watched the plane begin to move. The most powerful seat in any room was never the one with the best view. It's the one you refuse to leave when someone to uses that you don't belong in it. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that dignity should never depend on what you look like, what you wear, or whose comfort you're expected to protect, stay a little longer next time one of these comes up, because the next one might be the one you needed most. Every story like this one is for the person sitting in the seat that's rightfully theirs, being questioned by someone who never once checked the ticket. Justice doesn't always arrive loud. Sometimes it just sits quietly in seat 2A, hands on the armrests, voice steady, and simply refuses to move.